Hello, today is the day we transition from the days of ash into the days of hawthorn. So that happens today. I don't know what time of the day, but today. And tomorrow is the first full day of hawthorn. And we're in hawthorn until the 17th of April, when we go into the days of oak. So I'm just going to bring the PowerPoint presentation up and we'll look at some of the lore of hawthorn and the medicine that comes from hawthorn. Right. So the star lore of hawthorn, I'll just do a little bit of lore before I get into the medicine, is it goes from the 9th degree of Aries to the 27th degree of Aries. Every tree has 18 degrees. Aries governs the head. It's the first of the fire signs in the zodiac. And so it's the main sign for the upper cauldron. You know, with the ash tree, we jumped from the lower cauldron to the upper cauldron. So now we're in the head. We're well and truly in the head. And yet the medicine of hawthorn is largely about the heart. It's quite interesting. So all three cauldrons are kind of present always, with just some emphasis here and there. Now, the lore of the hawthorn tree in England is predominantly about May Day and ideas of Beltane, and the flowers of the hawthorn represent the spring goddess, referred to as the May Queen. So that's in a lot of English folklore customs around May Day and Beltane. But the phrase May Queen isn't an old Celtic title. You know, you're not going to find a story in the Mabinogion about the May Queen, or even a reference to a May Queen in Irish mythology. But with the Celts, there are lots of goddesses that are flower goddesses or springtime goddesses, and they represent sovereignty in a way. They represent the goddess of the land, and the rites of May are usually played out with one king fighting another king, like Oak King and Holly King, or two would-be lovers of the May Queen battling it out to win her hand in marriage. But that doesn't happen until Beltane, which we're not there yet. We've only just passed the equinox. So the hawthorn represents the heart's desire, I guess, medicine of the heart, and it's the heart's desire of the Oak King and the Holly King. She's the beautiful Queen of May, or she will be. But the lore of hawthorn is not as sweet and lovely as you would think, you know, and it's mainly because of its thorns, you know, recognizable as an early sign of May with the May blossom. But the word kennings for the Irish Bryatheroum for the hawthorn tree are an assembly of hounds. That's like getting ready for a hunt. The assembly of hounds, blanching of faces. It means the faces go white, and that's because the Irish name is Uatha, which means fear or horror, and it's because of the big spikes on the hawthorn tree, you know. And the third Bryatheroum is most difficult at night. You know, if you can't see where you're going and you're trying to stalk a prey at night time, a hawthorn hedge is going to baffle you completely, you know. And there's a bit of fun with that, with culpepper and nettles later on. So, you know, the Celtic expression for this tree is fear, horror. And that's played out in Welsh mythology, where Hawthorn is actually the king of the giants. It's a huge ogre of a giant called Ysbyddaden Pengower. And he's an old, gnarly, thorny hawthorn tree. And his daughter is the beautiful white blossoms. You know, she would be a May Queen, his beautiful daughter. Her name is Olwen, which means white tracks. Wherever she walks, little white flowers pop up and follow her. So she creates white tracks of flowers wherever she walks. Now, the story in the Mabinogion is called How Cilwch Won Olwen. And Cilwch is the young hero who falls in love with Olwen as soon as he hears her name. He doesn't even see her. He just hears her name and he falls in love with her. And he goes to her father, this great big spiky thorny giant, and says, I want to marry your daughter, you know. And Ysbyddaden Pengower, the giant, says, no, that's never happening. And the reason is because there's a prophecy that as soon as someone marries his daughter, then Ysbyddaden will die. You know, so he doesn't want to die, so he doesn't want this young upstart to marry his daughter. In the end, he gives in partly, and he says, okay, you can marry my daughter on the condition that you achieve certain tasks for me. And there's a long list of quite impossible tasks, which we won't go into now, but they're actually Star Law adventures, you know. But the thing is, they're impossible to achieve tasks, and that's the fun of the story, that there's these impossible tests to win the hand of Olwen in marriage. Anyway, every time the giant says, I want you to do such and such, Cilwch says, yes, I can do that, and it'd be easy. And then the giant says, well, and I also want you to do this. And the young lad says, yes, I can do that, and it will be easy. Anyway, after he's been given this long list of tasks, he goes away to King Arthur. King Arthur is his kinsman. He's his uncle or his cousin. And the young Cilwch goes into Arthur's court and tells his story, and he invokes the entirety of King Arthur's entourage to help him achieve this long list of impossible tasks. Now, that's all told in the Mabinogion story, how Cilwch won Olwen, and it is a happy ever after. He does achieve the impossible tasks, and he wins the flower goddess, you know, the May Queen. And so that's just one example of Hawthorn being a difficult testing tree. You know, yes, it's the reward is the beautiful May Queen, but she's going to come only after a series of trials and tribulations. So now just let someone in, so that interferes with the screen sharing. Okay, so Hawthorn, if you look at this diagram, it's the second tree of the rose family pentagram on the right-hand side of this wheel. So the rose family pentagram is anchored on apple at the bottom for summer solstice. And on either side of apple, balanced, is hawthorn and blackthorn as part of the pentagram. Now, the folklore cunning magic of hawthorn and blackthorn are quite different. Hawthorn, the May blossom, is also known as whitethorn. Now, they both have white blossom, but blackthorn is blackthorn, so hawthorn is whitethorn. And in traditional magic, witchcraft traditions, the hawthorn is a nice tree. You know, it's for healing. It's a white magic thorn tree. You know, the blackthorn, on the other hand, is a destructive magic tree. It's known as the blasting rod, you know. So Hawthorn magic is about healing and protection, and Blackthorn magic is about smiting your enemies, you know, like traditionally in Ireland, shillelagh is made of blackthorn. When it goes hard, it goes as hard as iron. And if you got hit on the head with a shillelagh, you wouldn't know about it. You probably wouldn't wake up. But that was their functions in a way. So both thorns are protective, of course. And the hawthorn is popular in England all around fields because it's a natural way of keeping livestock in the field and keeping people from penetrating or trespassing. You know, it's a very effective barrier because of all of its thorns. In the Ogham, with the ACMA that we're into now, is the first tree of the second ACMA, but it's followed by oak and holly. Because what I was just saying about the May Queen, that I call this observation the Beltane tree, because Beltane is the position between oak and holly. And in England, traditionally at May Day, Beltane is when the Oak King and Holly King battle for the May Queen. So although that is a relatively late English tradition, it's played out in the Ogham, you know. Just as the birch tree is the pioneer of the first ACME, Hawthorn is the pioneer of the second ACMA. And she is the heart's desire or the love interest that the Oak King and Holly King are interested in, you know. And of course, what will play out is the Oak King will win at Beltane, and we'll move forwards to hazel and apple for the summer solstice. And summer solstice position of apple is very much the sovereignty goddess or summer goddess sitting on a throne, you know. That gets played out in more complicated ways. So the ACMA we're in then, on the left-hand side, just as the first ACMA is born from the winter solstice, and it begins with birch, the first ACMA, but the solstice is yew. It's the conclusion of the previous ACMA. The second ACMA is born of spring equinox, which is the ash tree. So that's kind of the zero moment, the spring equinox. From that moment onwards, we're into the days of light. So in the days of light, the first tree is hawthorn in the days of light, the lighter half of the year. So the ACMA we're into now, the next 5 trees are hawthorn, oak, holly, hazel, concluding with apple at the summer solstice at the top here, you know. So it's interesting that this observation was made last year, that the letters of the second ACMA, which is H, D, T, C, and Q, for the 5 trees, correspond with the Irish numbers for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's quite interesting, and it's older than Ireland. It's the Proto-Indo-European language numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 begin with H, D, T, C, Q. So it's a curious thing. The Ogham does begin with birch tree after the winter solstice, but for some reason, this ACMA is numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I haven't got my head around any deeper meaning of that, other than each of the 4 groups seems to be different things. Like directly opposite this ACMA is the 4th ACMA, and that's the 5 vowels, or the 5 vowels are put together. So the 4th ACMA has verbal sounds that can be made with the mouth, and the second ACMA has numbers, you know. So it's a strange observation, and I've got nothing other to say about that, you know. It's just one of those things. Now each of the 4 quarters, the 4 ACMA, has a story, you know. So the story for the first ACMA was the water's edge, played out with the alder tree and the willow tree being directly opposite the cauldron with the triple goddess at Virgo. And the mystery tradition pattern played out with the second ACMA, I've called Floralia the rites of May. Of course, they're just different expressions of Beltane, but Floralia was a goddess festival of the goddess Flora, a Roman goddess, but she was in Britain from the 1st century to the 4th century for over 300 years. And the important thing about Flora is she's a flower goddess, just like all the Celtic flower goddesses. And her main festival was from the 28th of April until the 3rd of May. That is her main festival, the Floralia, was before Beltane and after Beltane. That covered that whole period of time. And it was a very sexual, fertility focused festival, you know, that the early church, when the Roman Empire became Christianized, they put a ban on it because people were celebrating naked and the Christians didn't like it and stuff, you know. So the idea of the kind of sexual innuendos of May Day, you know, with the maypole being a big erection and people dancing around a big erection that's inserted into Mother Earth, and so on, and rites of May and having cuddles in the forest at May Day. All that stuff goes way, way back to pre-Christian times, you know, certainly by the Romans. And we just don't know what the Celts did, really, because they didn't write anything down. But certainly there are plenty of Celtic flower goddesses, you know. So, yeah, you know, the fertility of the land and marrying the goddess of flowers to ensure the fertility of the land is going to have a honeymoon night and all of that kind of thing as well, you know. So as we said, oak and holly king battling to win the May Queen, that's kind of the main story of this ACMA, with some intrigues at the end with the hazel tree, which I'll get to when we get to the hazel tree. So I took these photos this morning, because I'm quite interested in how this moment in time corresponds with the trees. Now, the first ACMA, that doesn't work so well because, you know, your December, January, February, March, there's not much to see above ground. It's all happening below the ground in the roots, in the seeds growing underground and bulbs growing underground. So it's interesting that now we go hawthorn, oak, holly, hazel, apple, and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now there's visual harmonies with the positions of the trees. So this is a hawthorn hedge on the property here in Guernsey that I photographed just this morning. At the beginning of the days of hawthorns, it's opening. And most of the hawthorns haven't opened yet, but they're beginning to. Here's one of the famous thorns of the hawthorn, you know, and it's not the biggest. So they can be really vicious and nasty, you know, but they're a perfect protection for livestock in the field and for protecting your property. And you can see the buds here, they haven't opened yet. They're the leaves just waiting to open. So between now and the next 18 days, the hawthorn is going to open its leaves. That's going to happen right now. And then come early May, it will have its blossoms. Now, an interesting thing with the hawthorn and the blackthorn, and this tickles me, it's just one of those little things that I find very amusing, that the hawthorn produces leaves and then it blossoms, and the blackthorn produces blossom and then it produces leaves. So they do it back to front. So what sticks in my head is hawthorn leaves, then blossoms, and blackthorn blossoms, then leaves. You know, it's a good way of remembering them. Of course, their leaf shapes are quite different anyway. But here, just look at the spikes. The spikes are incredible, you know. And as incredible as they are, they're not as vicious as blackthorn. Blackthorn is far more spiky and far more nasty sort of thing. And if you get cut by a blackthorn, you need to get a tetanus jab because there's so many germs in the blackthorn as well. You know, it is really quite an unpleasant experience to be wounded by blackthorn. Now, hawthorn, as I said, was used for better kind magic, and the thorns could be taken and used for stitching, use them as needles, you know, for stitching things together, witches' charms and sewing things and tapestries and that kind of idea. And traditionally, the blackthorn thorns was for sticking in wax dolls or wax effigies of somebody, again, to do harm. So different uses, you know, the hawthorn for friendlier activities, blackthorn for hitting back at somebody. So then, after the blossom, the berries come. So the hawthorn blossoms in May, at the beginning of May. The berries come round about September, October. And the medicine of the hawthorn then. So hawthorn, you can drink it as a tea. You can dry the berries. You have to take the pips out, dry the berries, dry the leaves. You can drink the leaves and the berries as a tea, and it has all sorts of medicinal value. So famously, of course, it benefits the heart and heart conditions. So it's regular hawthorn tea is a known medicine that benefits people with angina. It's going to help with all sorts of heart disease. It lowers and balances high blood pressure. It brings high cholesterol down as well. It's a powerful antioxidant. It improves the blood circulation, boosts the immune system, and something it shares with nettle is it's an antihistamine as well. So a lot of people struggle with hay fever come spring, but hawthorn tea is actually going to help with the antihistamine. A lovely thing I learned in Glastonbury, I learned it from a friend called Steve, is to, just like you can make sloe gin from the blackthorn berries, you can also make Mayflower blossom mead. It's the same sort of thing. You get a bottle of mead, which is an alcohol made of honey, empty half of it and fill up the rest of the bottle with hawthorn blossom. And so what you have is hawthorn blossoms sitting in mead for a few months. Now, the magic of that is anybody that has seasonal affective disorder or depression in the wintertime, you know, having that hawthorn blossom mead at hand in the wintertime is known to help with the seasonal depressions, you know, that it's a way of literally bottling up the beginning of summer and having summer in a bottle, you know, that'll help you in the wintertime with the winter blues. So a nice little thing to do as well. You can gather it yourself, of course, but it's so easy to buy as a tea. You know, you can get hawthorn tea in most new age shops or even herbal shops and whole food shops now. Again, you know, it's got so many benefits, lowering blood pressure and so on. Now, looking for fungus medicine that relates to the hawthorn tree, had to go a little bit sideways with it. There is this mushroom, which is totally unique to the hawthorn tree. It's got a lovely little name. It's the hawthorn twiglet mushroom. But the thing with it, there's not much evidence on the internet about what you can do with it. I couldn't find anything. There's a couple of fungus sites, and they just say that it's inedible. You know, that's not much to say. It doesn't even say that it's poisonous, just that it's inedible. But from what we've observed so far with these Zoom sessions, every mushroom has some sort of benefit or another. Even the poisonous ones in tiny, tiny doses are a medicine. So it would be very unusual if the Hawthorn twiglet mushroom didn't have any value at all, or some sort of essence of the hawthorn, as it's unique to the hawthorn's fibers underground. You know, it only grows with the hawthorn tree in the mycelium under the ground. So that it's a symbiont, but maybe it's just evidence in itself that there's still a lot of research to be done in mycology, you know. So I'm not saying it's got no value, I just couldn't find anything on the internet. So I went to another mushroom. This mushroom grows under a few different trees, but it does favor the hawthorn tree. It will grow under other trees, so it's not unique to the hawthorn. Whereas the previous mushroom, the hawthorn twiglet mushroom, is unique to the hawthorn. But this strange looking fellow is a morel, M-O-R-E-L-S, morels. And I've never eaten one, but they're a bit of a delicacy, and they're highly prized, especially in France. You know, they're one of those, yeah, highly desired mushrooms, and it has a lot of great medicine. Thankfully, we don't have to go foraging for it. You can buy it online. You can get it as a dried mushroom and rehydrate it. So the morels will grow under a hawthorn tree, but also under other trees. So the benefits of the morel mushroom is it's antioxidant, it's anti-inflammatory, it's anti-tumor. So again, in the battle against cancer and cancerous growths, it helps. It's a battle against tumors. It's very, very high in vitamin D. So that helps with bone growth and the metabolism of calcium in the body. So it's going to help with your bones and your teeth and so on. Massively high in magnesium, potassium, manganese, zinc, and iron. You know, so it's a rather expensive delicatessen thing that's highly prized if you can find them. They're a good medicine to have, the morel. So that's the only mushrooms I could find for the hawthorn tree. And then I went to choosing a wildflower for this time of year, and I chose nettle just intuitively, really. Working on the ground here in Guernsey, I observed the young nettles coming up a few weeks ago, and I thought, okay, we'll do nettle. And what was nice about that is it's coming into its juvenile state right now, which is the ideal time for gathering nettle. And it has a lot of coincidences with the hawthorn tree. According to Nicholas Culpeper, nettle and hawthorn are both governed by Mars, you know, and they have similar health benefits. Now, Nicholas Culpeper is quite amusing with the nettle. Where have I written that down? And this is quite interesting too, because one of the Irish Bryatheroum for the hawthorn tree was most difficult at night. And it's very similar to what Nicholas Culpeper says about the nettle. I took this photo this morning, and these ones as well. So Nicholas Culpeper, he says, nettles are so well known that they need no description. They may be found by feeling with your hands in the darkest night. just even if you can't see because it's so dark, if you're feeling around with your hands, you'll know it's a nettle when you touch it because it's going to sting like buggery, you know. So that's quite funny that you can find it, you'll feel it in the darkest of nights, the nettle. And that's similar to the Bryatheroum then of the hawthorn with its thorns, most difficult at night, you know. So in a world before there were electric street lamps and battery powered torches and so on, you know, you're having to adventure at night time. Blackthorn and hawthorn and nettles and other things with thorns and spikes are a real presence, you know. You're going to know them when you encounter them. What's quite brilliant with the nettle, this is in the field here, is it usually grows very close to or with these big leaves. Now, the big leaf is the burdock, and they're a natural remedy, if you like. If you get badly stung by nettle, find a burdock leaf, which are quite recognizable because they're so big, and you crunch up the burdock leaf, get the juice out of it, and rub the sting with the burdock leaf, and it will take the sting away. So although nettle can be unpleasant if you get badly stung, the remedy is usually quite nearby in the burdock leaf. Now, as much as nettle might be a nuisance to many people, it's rather aggressive, not just in its sting, but as a weed. You know, it will take over a garden if you don't control it. But a lot like dandelion that we looked at last time, you know, dandelion has been treated as a weed that you just put chemicals on, and yet dandelion is one of the biggest medicinal powerhouses there is. Nettle too is a massive medicinal powerhouse. It's a superfood, you know. Because of its sting, it's a nuisance to people, and we've removed so far away from natural foraging that we just see these things as weeds and annoying, and so we try and stamp them out, much to our own misfortune, because dandelion and nettle would make a lot of people much healthier than they are right now, you know. So the benefits of nettles, you know, the sting is unpleasant, but even the sting has a medicinal value. So the Romans used to whip themselves with it, which seems like a sadomasochistic thing to do, but in a more primitive time, it improved blood circulation and it improved rheumatism, you know. So a half hour of discomfort is going to give you a lot of comfort later on when the rheumatism is put to sleep and so on, you know. But the way to harvest it without getting stung, of course, is to just put on some gloves, use your gloves and pick it. And you pick the top sort of 5 or 6 leaves. You want the top bits because they're the juvenile leaves and they've got more nutrition. The leaves lower down, you don't want to pick those because you want the plant to keep growing, and also the best nutrition's in the top leaves. So the top sort of 4, 5, 6 leaves, you pick those with gloves on. Now, as soon as they wilt, the sting goes away. As soon as you pour boiling water onto them, the sting goes away. And as soon as you cook them, the sting goes away. So the sting is only there in its living state. You know, as soon as it's been plucked and it begins to wilt, it will lose its power to sting. Now, there's many things you can do with the nettle, of course. I'll come to the tea in a minute, but you can use it as a food in pretty much anything you could do with spinach, you could do with nettle. You know, you could do, like in an Indian restaurant, you have sagaloo as potato and spinach. You could have potatoes and nettles to make sagaloo. famously, people make a spinach soup, sorry, a nettle soup, you know, nettle sagaloo. There's even some recipes for making nettle beer, you know, but the most easy way of getting the medicine from nettle, apart from soup, is to just drink nettle tea. And it's as simple as that, you know. So there's a lot of YouTube clips of bushcraft foragers just plucking handfuls of nettle leaves with their gloves on, putting them in a mug and pouring hot water onto it and drinking, you know. So the benefits of nettle tea then are it's a natural antihistamine. So if you can put up with the pain, if you've got bad hay fever, you know, rather than being a Roman whipping yourself, you could actually just get a leaf and stroke your forearm with the leaf, get a few stings, just a few stings, and that's going to help with the hay fever because it's an antihistamine. You know, but of course, it's easier to buy them from the shop now, antihistamines, but it is a natural way of dealing with hay fever and allergies. As a tea, it's very relaxing. It reduces stress and tension. The benefits are for rheumatism, so you don't need to whip yourself with it. You can just drink it as a tea. For ladies, it regulates menstruation. You know, it balances the body out and gets the rhythm right. It also helps mothers that are having breast milk feeding problems. If the milk's not flowing, nettle tea helps the milk to flow. So it's benefiting women in a strong way with menstruation and breastfeeding. For people with eczema, it can help with skin cleansing, you know, obviously putting on whatever ointments you need to put on, but you can help your skin from the inside by drinking nettle tea as well. And you can use it as a gargle for mouth ulcers and sore throats, you know, but generally similar to the hawthorn itself, both hawthorn and nettle are governed by Mars. They're both spiky in one way or another. They're only protecting themselves, of course, and they're both antihistamine. Yeah, so there we go. There's a general overview of the medicinal value of hawthorn and the Morels mushroom and good old nettle. I think next month, because we saw the burdock with the nettle, we might have a look at burdock. I think burdock's quite a powerful medicine as well. Right, so I'll keep recording until we do the meditation, but you can turn your microphones off and talk about the presentation.
Well, thank you, Yuri. It was really interesting.
I think naturally, I do see hawthorn as feminine, and I do think of the May Queen. Predominantly, that's how it speaks to me. But the Welsh and Irish lore is this fear, horror, testing of the youths who have to prove themselves. It's not a feeling I get from the tree, but that's the Celtic lore, I think, because of its thorns more than anything. Or maybe Aries being Mars and martial, and Aries being the first sign of the zodiac. It's where you start the quest from, maybe.
I was just wanted to ask you about the difference between burdock and dock, because burdock is very different from dock.
Oh, well,
and dock is the one, they're two different plants. And dock is the one that you use for the stinging nettles.
right.
And it's interesting because this is a bit of a weird thing. I'm getting 2 new kittens and I'm going to call them burdock, dandelion and burdock. And Culpepper says that dandelion is associated with Mars and burdock is associated with Venus, which is quite amazing. So I didn't realise that when I chose the names, because Burdoc's going to be the girl. And if you think about the birds, when you throw them at one another, they stick to you. So I think it's really interesting that earlier on, I thought you said about the fact that it was burdock that got rid of the stings of the nettles.
So I'll stand corrected on that. I didn't know they were separate things. So
Yeah, yes.
for the
Sorry,
nettles,
Yuri, it's just that
no,
while you were talking, I thought they were, when you said that, I thought, oh, I've misunderstood that then.
yeah,
And so I was very naughty. I looked it up while you
no.
were talking. And that's how I know that they are. So
As I
it wasn't in here already. I
Yeah.
had to look it up. Yeah.
As I understand it,
So,
then,
uh,
as I understand it, for the nettle sting, it's dock. Maybe not
dock,
bird,
yeah,
but dock leaves is
not
how I mean.
burdock, yeah. And yeah, and burdock has that lovely little burr, which has got like a purpley center to it. And the actual outside of it will stick on you if you throw them at one another. Yeah, we did it as kids. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a good
Okay.
prompt. That's a good prompt then. So, but for the next session with the oak tree, we'll look at dock and burdock, and we'll look at the differences.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm still learning.
I wonder if
Aren't
the
we all?
Yeah.
I wonder if the allusion to the young men has something to do with the connection with the competition for the maiden.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking, and it fits in. Tomorrow on the Facebook group, I'll put a write-up that I already have about the hawthorn tree, and I talk about different young heroes starting off on their adventures to win the object of their desire. And it's quite a common story, it's in classical Greek mythology and so on, but it's definitely there with Killuke and Olwen as well. And so it maybe the spring equinox and all of the vitality of Mars and that fire in the head, passion, is going to shoot you off, proving yourself.
There's a motif in Killuke and Olwen that really deserves to be mentioned, and that is Turk Truith.
Yes.
That there's the final challenge before Killuke is to hunt the boar Turk Truith that comes from Ireland, and he just is this monstrous, unbeatable, titanic boar, and he's got to get the comb, the razor, and the scissors to tonsure the giant, and then cut off the giant's head. And it really, I read that as a psychological challenge that we have if we have these boorish, self-destructive or socially destructive behaviors, like we're really primitive outsiders to some higher cultural milieu, and we have to get tonsured. We have to, deal with these really bad, vulgar habits in order to win the maiden. And that Esbathaden then says, all right, now you've cut my hair, now you can cut off my head and take the daughter.
So much to say on all of that. I know maybe over the days ahead, there's a Greek story of the hunt for the Caledonian boar. And the Greek hero has to enlist the help of all sorts of heroes to help him. So it's the same as Killuke, same thing. And it's this great big boar hunt that concludes it all as well.
Yeah. I'm just having a flash of, ships at sea in ancient times. There were probably people from all different countries, and they were all sharing stories, and, it was probably well fertilized all throughout the world.
And in the Mabinogion, Killuke, his father is Prince Celadon, which is the Caledonian boar. That there's a kind of innuendo or suggestion of a connection there. And
definitely.
I would argue that the boar, as strange as it may seem, is actually Taurus the bull. And there's 7 piglets, which I would say are the Pleiades on the neck
Yeah,
of
it makes
the bull.
makes
And
perfect sense.
it's because the hunter is Orion facing off against Taurus with the 7 stars, you know.
If I'm not mistaken, in Merlin's first prophecy of the coming of Arthur, he says, "Till the wild boar bear the crown from Cornwall, to rule the ocean's islands and the forests of Gaul, till even the house of Romulus will tremble." He mentions the boar.
Yeah, and he's usually, the implication he's referring to Arthur. So Arthur's Pendragon, but he's also this vicious boar, plowing through everything, you know, like kind of a symbol of ferocious.
I'm reminded of that instrument. What's it called? That thing with the voice?
Carnix.
Yeah, the Carnix.
Yeah. Do you know what a boar spear is like? A boar spear, you know, that the person hunting the boar in later days was on horseback, and the boar spear is a long spear, but it has a great big crossbar going off tangentially, and that's monstrous because the boar is so ferocious that even if it's stabbed with the spear, it will work its way up the spear to attack the man on the horse. So the spear has this crossbar to stop the boar going up the spear. You know?
Wow.
That's how ferocious they were.
I just wanted to share something. I can't remember her name, and I bet you can, Yuri. The lady that wrote the Beasts of Albion Oracle cards. And in that, the boar, the teaching of the boar, is taking the treasure from between the tusks. And it's actually being in strength in order to get past those tusks to actually achieve getting the reward. And you know, when you think of blackthorn and hawthorn, you think of the two on either side, and you're going in between them to reap the benefit. So I think that's really interesting that the boar came into the conversation. I can't think of an Miranda Gray. Is it Miranda Gray? I think so. Beautiful cards, beautiful.
So getting the treasures from the boar's head, you know, the comb and the scissors, whatever, achieving that is the final test. You know, if you can get those treasures from the boar's head, then you've succeeded. You've won the May Queen, you know.
Yeah. I thought your presentation was so interesting. I love your presentations. They're wonderful.
Thank you. I'm learning as I go along. You know, I know the Welsh stories quite well. I don't know the Irish stories very well. I'm still learning the Irish stories, and I'm still learning herb lore, you know, so I'm learning as we go along, and that keeps me interested. You know, I want to keep learning as well. Any other thoughts or questions, or we can go into the meditation? Carmel?
Yeah, hi. It's my first time in the group. My friend Veronica told me about it. So hello to everybody, and thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, I missed a few things. I found I was trying to write but I can't write as fast as you speak. I really enjoyed, especially the diagrams. I thought that was a very good way of teaching the Om. And did you say you have a book? Because I'd like to, there was, one of the things was about the first acme being sounds, the second acme being numbers, and I didn't catch all of the numbers, so I'd like to have that wherever you have a publishing or whatever, I'd buy it.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank
you, brilliant.
That's newish stuff. It's not in there is a book that's published, but it's not in there because these are things I've learned since I published the book. But on the Facebook group, the Owen Grove, there's a files section. And in the files section, you'll find lots of free PDF files that are just there for free. And one of them has a load of charts and diagrams in. So that's there for free. I've got a new book
Thank
coming
you
out this
very
summer.
much. You're very, very generous. This for €5, free files. Oh my God. Thank you and bless you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, he knows, Carmel, that what you give to yourself, and that's the secret. That's what makes it all work.
Gary, I just wanted to quickly mention two great images from the story of Ulrich and Kulik and Owen, and that is Kai and another knight riding the salmons back to find the mob and to find the child who can hunt the boar, the greatest huntsman in the world, and it's the child, like the inner child, that
Mabon.
can be in touch with these, titanic forces.
It's too much to go into, but just two stories then from the Mabinogion. The story of Taliesin and Ceridwen is definitely a Star-Lore story and a Star-Lore year cycle. We've gone into that in some detail, and there's a free file of that on the Facebook group. And the story of Kiluk and Owen, many of these impossible tasks are Star-Lore adventures. So that's two stories in the Mabinogion that are quite heavily laden with Star-Lore adventures and constellation adventures. And that's really interesting. I would, I'm thinking of the game Gwythgwyl, which in Irish is Fidgil. It's the Battle of the Trees or the Game of Trees, the chess-like game. It's definitely going to be a Star-Lore type seasonal pattern in that as well, because that's what both Irish and Welsh mythology are singing about. A possible triple Mercury with Ireland are the three gods known as and I apologize if I pronounce it badly, the Trí de Dana, the three gods of Dana. And that's Lugh, Ogma, and Dagda. And they're a trio after the second battle of Moytura. They go looking for the Dagda's harp, which had been stolen by the Fomorians. So if you just look at that as a triple Mercury figure, the young Mercury is Lugh, and he invents this game of tree sense, tree wisdom, tree magic, tree logic, Fidgil. The middle figure, Ogma, creates a writing system when each of the letters is a tree, and the third aspect, the Dagda, has this magical harp that keeps the seasons turning. That somehow, with all three aspects of that Mercury figure, you've got trees and a year cycle being sung in different story metaphors.
I think Widwill is a way to study seasonal patterns and maybe astrological patterns that would give you great advantage in war. So that if you're fighting tribal skirmishes, you can think in terms of what are the seasonal advantages for us and what are the seasonal disadvantages for them. And in terms of, different tribes would have connections to different astrological archetypes. And so you'd be thinking in terms of your enemy, how to deal with an enemy according to their archetypal and elemental signature, because there would be natural strategies to use. Some astrological associations would be very different than others. A fire sign, you wouldn't treat them as a water sign. You wouldn't treat an air sign as an earth sign. And so thinking in terms of these metaphysics, you're thinking of the battle in a very ancient alchemical way, like really getting into the actual fundamental field of creation through these archetypal images.
Here's another perspective too, and looking at the mystery school pattern of the rites of May, then with the mystery schools, you as the observer, observing the mystery unfold, you learn aspects of yourself by watching the story unfold. So therefore, when we talk about the Oak King and the Holly King or the May Queen, they're all aspects of ourself. And one way of looking at the Oak King and the Holly King is the mortal self and the immortal self. And so there's a battle between winter and summer is a challenge between two aspects of yourself, the bit that's going to die and the bit that's eternal. And what they're trying to marry is sovereignty. So they're trying to help you get to that alchemical marriage inside you with your own anima or whatever it is. So that's all quite heavy stuff, but I think that's being played out in this ACMA with the next 4 trees. On the one hand, it's Oak King, Holly King trying to win the May Queen, but that's a process inside of you as well, all of us, men and women. That process is there. The Summer King is the mortal self, the flesh and bone and the brain that will perish. And the Holly King or Winter King is your eternal soul that is never going to perish, but somehow they work together, and sovereignty is the harmonizing factor between the two, because if you don't have sovereignty, you're not in charge of your kingdom, you're not in charge of your 3 cauldrons and so on. That's all quite heavy stuff and fascinating though.
And I think part of the battle there is overcoming one's habitual nature, because it's very easy for life to drive into a rut, and we need a rebirth. And that's where sovereignty can come into it, because nothing's more motivating than falling in love or being on a mission that wakes you up and you realize that you have an exciting purpose. And it's like Bilbo going on an adventure after Gandalf introduces him to the dwarves. He finds himself running into an adventure. And but it's all worth it was all worth it, because in the end he's much wiser for it.
Here's an interesting observation from Ireland then. This relates to the High King of Ireland and the place Tara, where the High King would ceremonially, ritualistically marry the sovereignty goddess of the land, who in Tara was known as Maeve. But there were 3 basic rules that the king had to live by if he wanted to stay married to sovereignty. And at first they seem quite naive or simple, but I think they're actually very profound. And this is how it is. So the first rule is to not be fearful, to not be frightened. So an ideal king or your ideal self-sovereignty is no fear. Well, that's a big thing. The second one is to not be mean. Don't be nasty, don't be mean. And the third one is never be jealous. So these are the 3 rules that the queen, the sovereignty goddess of Tara, demands. No fear, no meanness, and no jealousy. Now, simplistically then, no fear means be peaceful. If you're peaceful, you're not frightened, you're just peaceful, okay? Not being mean means be kind, be gentle, be kind. So you're peaceful and you're kind. And not being jealous is to be content. So if you're peaceful, kind, and content, then you have self-sovereignty. Now, if you don't have self-sovereignty over yourself, how can you be sovereign over anything? You know, it's pretty big stuff, isn't it, really? And I'm not saying I could live up to that, but that's the ideal then. Be peaceful, be kind, be content. Then you have self-sovereignty. And then the alchemical marriage is there, you know. But it only takes a bad soap opera to rattle the boat, doesn't it? You know, or someone being nasty to you. And can you be peaceful and kind and content through all of life's trials? Big stuff. But
I'm halfway through the Mabinogion, and what has struck me is the nobility of the characters and the you know, there's no hesitation. Everything just happens like 1, 2, 3, and they have those qualities. You know, they're impeccably kind. They're impeccably it's in service, and any kind of challenge that arises, they don't hesitate. They're immediately moving towards it, almost comically. But what I notice is that it affects the emotion, that it affects the endocrine system, and it starts to light up something really beautiful and noble in the consciousness. It's an alchemical it's like reading the story is creating an alchemical change in one's in the mind that is, you know, beginning to vibrate at these much higher levels of the Arthurian ideals. It's comical and wonderful.
To look at it from a different angle, then, who would not want to be peaceful? Who would not want to be kind? Who would not want to be content? It's a no-brainer, isn't it, really? You know, they're the correct ways to be. And if you are not peaceful, kind, and content, then you're going to get ill. You know, you're going to get mentally ill. There's going to be illness in the body, you know. So it's pretty big medicine. And we all get frightened sometimes. We all get angry sometimes, but they're not the ideal state of being. We all know that.
And we think the world out there is something other than ourselves, but it's actually a projection of what's on the inside. And so the things that we're trying to avoid are the very things that we're sort of bound to come in contact with.
Yeah.
And so opening up to those ideals is a strategy to survive without it, you know, confronting with one's own shadows.
So the mystery school theatres help you explore those ideas because they make you look at them in your own world. Anyway, we're losing time. If you turn the microphones off, I'll stop recording and we'll do a meditation to the Hawthorn tree. I'll just press stop recording up there.